Private Chloe Parker had pictured a lot of things about her first real assignment. A rifle range, an obstacle course, maybe even a training exercise where she'd finally prove she belonged in this uniform. She had not pictured a kennel. "Say that again," she said. Staff Sergeant Dana Reyes didn't look up from the clipboard in her hand. "Kennel 12. You're assigned to Rico's care and conditioning until further notice. Rico is a dog. Rico is a military working dog with more combat time than half the NCOs on this base," Reyes said. "Watch your tone." Chloe pressed her lips together and said nothing else, though everything in her wanted to argue. She'd scored well on her physical fitness test. She'd requested infantry support track and gotten it, or thought she had, until this morning, when her name showed up on a reassignment sheet taped to the bulletin board like an afterthought. The kennel building smelled like bleach and old fur. Metal runs lined both walls, most of them occupied by dogs that barked or paced or pressed against the chain link the moment she walked past. Rico's kennel was the last one on the left, and he didn't move at all. He was lying with his chin on his paws, watching her with dark eyes that didn't blink much. His muzzle had gone gray in patches. One of his back legs was shaved in a rectangle where an old surgical scar had healed uneven and thick, and he held that hip slightly off the concrete even lying down, like it never stopped bothering him. "He doesn't get up for people anymore," Reyes said. "Doesn't mean much unless you know him." "How am I supposed to know him?" "That's the assignment." Reyes finally looked at her. "Feed him, groom him, walk him twice a day, more if his hip allows it. Log everything, and earn his trust before you try to give him orders. He won't take one otherwise." Chloe glanced at the dog again. He hadn't so much as lifted his head. "He looks like he's barely holding it together." "He's held together plenty," Reyes said. And something in her voice closed the subject before Chloe could ask what that meant. She was left with a clipboard, a feeding schedule, and a leash she didn't know if she'd ever get to use. Word got around the barracks fast. By evening, a recruit named Dobbins was leaning against the doorway of the common room, grinning at her like he'd been saving it up all day. "Heard you got put on dog walking duty," he said. "That's rough. Guess somebody's got to do the easy stuff." "It's not dog walking," Chloe said, though she wasn't sure that was true yet. "Sure looked like it when I saw you standing outside Kennel 12, staring at a dog that wouldn't even get up." He laughed, and a couple of the others laughed with him, and Chloe felt her face go hot in a way that had nothing to do with the heat outside. She didn't say anything back. She'd learned that much in 6 weeks, that the fastest way to make something worse was to let people see it land. But it landed anyway. It sat with her through dinner, through the walk back to the kennel that evening to check on the feeding log like she'd been told, through the quiet when she let herself back into the building and the other dogs started up their noise again, all of them wanting something from her except the one she was actually assigned to. Rico hadn't moved from where she'd left him hours earlier. "You're supposed to eat," she said, crouching by the bowl she'd set inside his run that morning. The kibble sat untouched, a few pieces scattered where he must have nosed at it and stopped. "That's the one thing on this sheet that isn't complicated." He lifted his head at the sound of her voice, just slightly, enough to look at her without lifting his chin off his paws. Then he set it back down. She stayed crouched there a while longer, not really sure why. It wasn't like he needed the company. He'd clearly been fine without her for however long he'd been in that kennel before she showed up. But something about the way he looked at her, steady and unbothered and completely unimpressed, made her feel like she was the one being evaluated instead of the other way around. "I didn't ask for this either," she told him. He didn't respond, obviously. Dogs didn't do that. But she thought, maybe just because she wanted to believe it, that he understood the sentiment better than anyone else on this base had all day. She wrote in the log, "Rico did not eat this evening. Appetite, none observed. Behavior, withdrawn. Minimal movement." Then she added a line that wasn't part of the form because there wasn't anywhere else to put it. "Not sure what I'm supposed to be doing here." She turned off the light in the kennel building and walked back to the barracks in the dark, already dreading what tomorrow's version of this would look like. Another day of an assignment she hadn't wanted, with a dog who didn't seem to want her there either. The request for reassignment sat half-written in Chloe's notebook for 2 days before she worked up the nerve to bring it to Reyes. She never got the chance to hand it over. Reyes intercepted her outside the administration building with a manila folder already in hand. "Before you ask for anything," Reyes said, "read this first." "Read what?" "His file." She pushed the folder into Chloe's hands. "You don't get to request a transfer off an assignment you don't understand. Read it tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." Chloe wanted to argue that she understood plenty. She understood she'd been handed a dog who wouldn't eat, wouldn't move, and clearly wanted nothing to do with her. But something in Reyes's face told her this wasn't a conversation open for negotiation, so she took the folder back to the barracks and opened it after lights out, using her phone's flashlight so she wouldn't wake anyone. The first pages were standard: breed, age, training certifications, a service number. Then the deployment history started, and she stopped skimming. 3 tours. Afghanistan twice, then a shorter deployment she didn't recognize the designation for. Detection work, primarily explosives, paired for the last 4 years of his service with a sergeant first class named Marcus Webb. She kept reading. An incident report from Rico's second deployment described a patrol that had walked directly into a pressure plate device buried under a stretch of road the unit had crossed a dozen times without issue. Rico had alerted less than 10 feet from the plate, stopped hard, refused to advance, forced the patrol to reroute. The report was clinical, full of grid coordinates and unit designations, but Chloe understood what it meant. Whatever would have happened if he hadn't stopped, it would have been worse than a training exercise gone wrong. The next section was harder to read. An attack during his 3rd deployment, a firefight that had gone on long enough for the report to run 2 pages. Webb had been killed. Rico had been hit by shrapnel in the same engagement. The surgical scar on his hip, she realized. The one she'd noticed the first day. There was a note from a unit commander recommending Rico for medical retirement following his recovery. Dated almost 2 years back, but he was still here. Still in a kennel at Fort Bragg instead of retired to some family's living room. She found out why on the second to last page. A shorter document, more recent, titled Behavioral Assessment Recommendation. Reading it made her stomach tighten. It described Rico as unresponsive to handler pairing attempts, withdrawn, exhibiting signs consistent with operational decline, inconsistent with continued service or safe rehoming. The recommendation at the bottom, dated 8 months ago, was euthanasia. There was a handwritten note in the margin, different ink, clearly added later. Request 90-day extension for conditioning attempt. D. Reyes. Chloe sat with the folder open on her lap for a long time after that. She found Reyes at the kennel the next morning before the rest of her shift started. "You knew he was scheduled to be put down," Chloe said. It wasn't really a question. Reyes didn't look surprised that she'd pieced it together. "I've known Rico for 2 years. I was in the room with the review board when they made that recommendation." She leaned against the kennel wall, arms crossed. "I asked for time instead. 90 days became 180. Now here we are. Why do you care so much?" "Because he earned better than a stopwatch," Reyes said simply. "Dogs like him don't get medals. They get retirement paperwork if they're lucky, and if they're not, they get a euthanasia recommendation buried in a file nobody reads unless they're forced to." She looked at Chloe carefully. "You read it. So now you understand what unmanageable behavioral decline actually means. It means a dog who lost the one person he trusted and hasn't figured out how to trust anyone since." Chloe looked past her, toward Kennel 12, where Rico was lying in the same position he always was, chin on paws, watching without watching. "I still don't know what I'm supposed to do about that," she admitted. "Nobody's asking you to fix him in a week," Reyes said. "I'm asking you to show up. That's all conditioning ever is. You keep showing up until showing up means something to him." Chloe didn't hand over the transfer request that day. She told herself it was because she hadn't finished writing it, but she knew that wasn't really true. That evening, she carried a folding stool into the kennel building and set it outside Rico's run instead of crouching like she usually did. She sat down, elbows on her knees, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she wasn't there to feed him or log his behavior or check a box on a form. "You stopped a patrol from getting killed," she said. "That's in your file, you know, before all this." She gestured vaguely at the kennel, the concrete, the quiet building around them. "I don't know what that's like. I haven't done anything yet. I haven't even finished training." Rico's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, the way it always did. But he didn't lift his head. "I was going to ask for a transfer," she admitted. "I still might. But Reyes says I don't get to decide that until I understand what I'm actually looking at." She paused. "So, I'm trying to understand." He let out a slow breath through his nose, something between a sigh and dismissal, and closed his eyes. It wasn't progress. Not really. But it was the first time he hadn't looked away from her like she was just another uniform passing through his kennel, and for reasons she couldn't fully explain, that felt like something worth writing down. By the end of the second week, Chloe had a routine, even if she wouldn't have called it progress. Morning feeding first, before her own breakfast, because Reyes had told her the order mattered. A dog like Rico needed to know someone else's needs came before hers if he was ever going to trust her judgment. Then grooming, 10 minutes with a soft brush along his flank, while he tolerated it more than enjoyed it. Then a walk, slow and short, favoring his bad hip, out past the motor pool to a stretch of grass where he could stand in the sun without anyone bothering him. He still didn't greet her. But he'd started lifting his head when she came in, instead of just his ears, and once or twice she'd caught him watching her from across the run when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She was learning to take what she could get. The live fire exercise happened on a Thursday, and nobody had thought to warn her. She was midway through his afternoon walk, out near the tree line where the noise from the range usually faded to almost nothing, when a burst of automatic fire cracked out closer than either of them expected. Some unit running drills on a range she hadn't realized had opened up that day. Rico didn't yelp. He didn't run. He simply dropped, flat to the ground, body rigid, breathing fast and shallow, eyes fixed on nothing. Hey, it's okay." Chloe crouched beside him, hand hovering over his back without touching yet, unsure if contact would help or make it worse. "It's just the range. You're not there anymore." Another burst of fire sounded, farther off this time, and Rico pressed himself flatter against the grass, a low sound coming from his chest that wasn't quite a whine. She'd read enough of his file by now to guess what this was. Whatever had happened to him during that firefight 2 years ago hadn't stayed in the report. It had come home with him. She lowered her hand slowly onto his shoulder, keeping her voice low and even, the same tone Reyes used when she talked through a task instead of barking it. "You're at Bragg. You're safe. I've got you." It took almost 4 minutes. She counted them off on her watch afterward, because it felt important to know, before his breathing slowed and his body unlocked enough to lift his head. He looked at her like he wasn't entirely sure how she'd gotten there, and then, for the first time since she'd been assigned to him, he leaned his weight into her leg. She didn't move until he was ready to. When they finally walked back to the kennel, she kept one hand resting lightly on his back the whole way, and he let her. That night, she wrote in the log. Range fire triggered acute stress response. Recovery time, approximately 4 minutes. Physical contact appeared to help. She didn't write down how her own hands had been shaking a little too by the end of it. That didn't feel like it belonged in a training log, but it stayed with her anyway. The sense that whatever Rico had survived, it wasn't something a person just walked away from clean, dog or not. The trouble came 4 days later, and it wasn't Rico's fault, though it took nearly getting him flagged for anyone else to see that. A handler from another unit, a corporal named Foster, had come by the kennel to drop off supplies and, without asking, crouched down fast in front of Rico's run and reached a hand through the chain link toward his face, the kind of quick, careless gesture people made toward dogs all the time, without thinking about it. Rico snapped. Not a bite, not quite, but close enough that Foster yanked his hand back and swore loudly. And within the hour there was an incident report being drafted with the phrase, "unprovoked aggression," typed across the top. Chloe found out about it from Dobbins, of all people, who seemed almost gleeful delivering the news. "Heard your dog tried to take a guy's fingers off. Bet that gets him put down instead of retired." She didn't bother responding to him. She went straight to Reyes. "It wasn't unprovoked," Chloe said, before Reyes had even finished reading the draft report. Foster came up on him fast, reached into his space without any warning. Rico startled. "That's not the same as aggression." "That's not how it's going to read on paper," Reyes said, though she didn't sound like she disagreed. "Then the paper's wrong." Chloe heard her own voice rise and made herself bring it back down. "I was there for the range incident 4 days ago. I've watched him every day for 2 weeks. He doesn't lash out at nothing. He reacts to things that would have gotten him killed if he hadn't reacted to them, back when it mattered. Somebody just needs to actually look at what happened instead of what it looks like on a form." Reyes studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that seemed to be measuring something beyond the words Chloe had just said. "You want to write a statement," she said finally. "Not required of you, but it'd carry weight, coming from the person handling his day-to-day." "Yes," Chloe said, without hesitating. "I want to write it." She stayed up that night drafting it, tearing up 2 versions before she got the tone right. Factual, specific. No more emotion in it than the incident deserved, because she understood now that emotion was exactly what would get it dismissed. She described the approach, the lack of warning, the speed of the reach. She cited the range incident as evidence of a documented stress pattern, not a temperament flaw. She didn't mention his file, his deployments, or web, because Reyes had told her once that sympathy didn't win reviews. Clarity did. She turned it in the next morning before her shift started, and then went to sit outside Kennel 12, because there was nothing left to do but wait and keep showing up. Which was, she was starting to understand, most of what this assignment had ever actually been asking of her. Rico lifted his head when she sat down. This time, he didn't put it back on his paws right away. The report came back 3 days later, and it wasn't the outcome Chloe had been hoping for. Reyes called her into the kennel office, a cramped room with a metal desk and a wall of photographs. Dogs and handlers going back years, some of them faded enough that Chloe couldn't make out the faces. She gestured for Chloe to sit. "Foster's incident isn't going to result in disciplinary action against Rico," Reyes said. "Your statement helped, but Command's not willing to let it drop entirely either. They're ordering a formal behavioral evaluation before his retirement paperwork gets finalized. 5 days from now." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means a certified evaluator puts him through a series of controlled scenarios. Noise exposure, handler approach, crowd tolerance, basic obedience under stress. If he passes, his retirement goes through clean. He gets adopted out, lives out the rest of his life somewhere quiet." Reyes paused. "If he fails, there's no rehoming option. A dog flagged as an unmanaged safety risk doesn't get placed with a civilian family. He gets euthanized instead." Chloe felt something cold settle in her chest. 5 days isn't enough time to undo 2 years of this. "No," Reyes agreed, "but it might be enough time to help him get through one afternoon." Chloe didn't sleep well that night. She kept thinking about the way he'd frozen during the range fire, how long it had taken him to come back from it, and wondering what a stranger with a clipboard and a stopwatch was going to make of 4 minutes like that. She spent the next 5 days doing everything she could think of. She played recordings of range fire at low volume during his feeding time, first from another room, then closer, always pairing the sound with something good. His favorite treats, calm praise, her hand steady on his back. She asked 2 soldiers she trusted to practice approaching him slowly, palms visible, voices low, so he'd have more than just her to associate with safety. She kept detailed notes on what helped and what didn't, cross-referencing it against the little she knew of his training history, trying to rebuild something instead of just hoping it healed on its own. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. On the third day, a truck backfired near the motor pool and he dropped to the ground so fast she barely got a hand on him in time, and it took nearly 10 minutes before he'd stand again. Longer than the range incident, not shorter, and she'd walked away from that session feeling like she'd lost ground instead of gained it. She said as much to Reyes that evening, sitting on an overturned crate outside the kennel while Reyes finished a cigarette she wasn't supposed to be smoking on base property. "I don't think 5 days is enough," Chloe admitted. "I think I'm just delaying the part where I have to watch this go wrong." "Maybe," Reyes said. "Or maybe you're doing exactly what needs doing, and it just doesn't look like progress yet, because you want it to look like more than it is." "Why do you care this much?" Chloe asked again. The same question from weeks ago, except this time she actually wanted the real answer. Reyes was quiet for a moment. "Webb trained me," she said finally. "Before he was ever paired with Rico. He was the one who taught me half of what I know about handling. I was there the day they told his family he didn't make it home. And I was there 8 months ago when a review board decided the fastest paperwork solution for what Rico's been carrying since was a needle." She flicked ash off the end of her cigarette. "I told myself I owed Webb that much, to make sure his dog got a chance to go out slow, in someone's living room, instead of on a table because nobody wanted to do the harder thing." Chloe didn't say anything for a while after that. It was the most Reyes had ever told her, and it made the assignment feel less like a task she'd been handed, and more like something she'd been trusted with. The morning of the evaluation arrived overcast, humid, the kind of day that made everyone a little on edge before anything had even happened. The evaluator, a contractor named Halverson, ran through the early scenarios without much drama. Basic commands, crowd tolerance, a controlled approach from a stranger that Rico handled with only mild tension. Then came the noise exposure. The recorded gunfire started at low volume, exactly as they'd practiced, and Rico held steady, ears back but standing. Halverson increased the volume in stages, checking a stopwatch, making notes on a tablet. On the third increase, a burst louder and sharper than anything they'd used in practice, Rico dropped hard to the ground, body rigid, and didn't come back up. "Give him distance," Halverson said, motioning Chloe back. "Let's see if he self-regulates." Chloe watched Rico's sides heaving, his eyes fixed on nothing, and she knew, the way she'd known during the range incident, the way she'd known during the truck backfire, that distance wasn't going to bring him back. Not this time, not with everything riding on the next 60 seconds. She stepped forward instead of back. "Private, step away," Halverson said sharply. "That's not protocol." "I know," Chloe said, already kneeling beside him, one hand flat against his shoulder, her voice low and steady the way it had been every time before. "But it's what works." Halverson didn't stop her. For a long 3 or 4 seconds, nobody moved. Chloe kneeling in the grass with her hand flat against Rico's shoulder, the evaluator standing with his tablet half raised. Reyes watching from the fence line with an expression Chloe couldn't read. Then Rico's breathing began to slow, the same way it had during the range incident, the same way it had after the truck backfired, and this time it took less than 2 minutes instead of 10. He lifted his head. He looked at her, not at the speaker still playing faint recorded gunfire a few yards away, and after a moment he pushed himself up onto all 4 legs and stood there, leaning slightly into her side, waiting. Halverson lowered the tablet slowly. "That's not how self-regulation is supposed to work," he said, though he didn't sound angry anymore, just genuinely surprised. "No," Chloe agreed. "It's not supposed to work with me at all, but it does." He made a note, longer than the others, and didn't ask her to step back again for the rest of the evaluation. Rico passed. Barely, and with a footnote in Halverson's report that Chloe read later at Reyes's insistence, a line noting that the dog's recovery under stress appeared to be handler-dependent rather than independently regulated, an outcome the evaluator described as unorthodox, but sufficient to demonstrate the animal was not an unmanaged risk. There was also buried in the same report a line about Chloe herself, a note that Private Parker's intervention had deviated from evaluation protocol and could have resulted in disciplinary action had the outcome been different. Reyes told her about it flatly, without softening it. "You should know that could have gone against you," Reyes said. "If he'd reacted badly to you closing that distance, if it had looked like you were interfering with a formal evaluation instead of helping it along, you'd be writing a very different kind of statement right now." "I know," Chloe said. "I did it anyway." "I know you did." Reyes almost smiled. "That's sort of the point I've been waiting for you to get to." Rico's retirement paperwork cleared within the week. Reyes brought Chloe into the office to explain what came next, laying it out the way she laid out everything, plainly, without dressing it up. "He's approved for civilian adoption," Reyes said. "There's a family on a waiting list, retired vet's household, good yard, no small kids to worry about startling him. That's option 1. It's a good option. He'd be comfortable." "What's option 2? "There's a provision most people don't use, because it asks a lot of whoever picks it. A dog like Rico can stay in a light support role. No deployments, no operational tasking, just presence work, demonstrations, mentoring younger dogs coming up through training. If his current handler in training requests reclassification into the K9 program and takes over his care full-time until his actual retirement date. After that, she'd have first right to adopt him herself." Reyes paused. "It means giving up your infantry track. It means starting over in a program that's slower, less glamorous, and frankly, not what most 20-year-olds walk in wanting." Chloe didn't answer right away. She thought about the bulletin board 6 weeks ago, her name on a reassignment sheet she'd been furious about. She thought about Dobbins laughing in the barracks doorway, about the file she'd read by phone light, about 4 minutes counted off on a watch in a stretch of grass near the tree line, about kneeling in front of an evaluator who told her to step back. "I'm not giving anything up," she said finally. "I'm choosing something I didn't know I wanted 6 weeks ago. That's different." Reyes nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer, and had just needed to hear Chloe say it out loud for herself. "Then let's get the paperwork started." That evening, Chloe sat on the same folding stool outside Kennel 12, though these days she mostly left the run door open and sat inside it instead. Rico stretched out beside her with his head resting against her leg. "You're stuck with me now," she told him. "Officially, I mean. Not that you had much of a say in it before either." He huffed out a breath through his nose, the sound she'd come to recognize as something between contentment and mild indifference, and closed his eyes. She thought about the version of herself who'd stood in this same kennel 6 weeks ago, certain this assignment was a punishment, certain she was being kept from the career she actually wanted. She hadn't been wrong that it was different from what she'd pictured. She'd been wrong about what mattered. Nobody had prepared her for how much of military service was this. Not the training exercises or the rifle range, but showing up every day for someone who couldn't tell you whether it was working, until one day it just was. Rico hadn't needed a hero. He'd needed someone willing to sit outside a kennel and keep coming back, long after it stopped feeling like an order and started feeling like something she'd chosen on her own. She scratched behind his ear, and he leaned harder into her hand. And outside the kennel building, the base carried on with its ordinary evening noise. Trucks, distant voices, someone's radio playing too loud somewhere down the row. All of it a little easier to sit inside of now that she had a job that actually made sense to her. She still didn't know exactly what the K9 program would ask of her. But she knew what 6 weeks with one aging, mistrustful dog had already taught her. And she suspected that was worth more than anything she would have learned on the track she'd originally wanted. And there you have it, dear viewers. Chloe's story, and Rico's too. If this one moved you, if you found yourself hoping right alongside her, that's exactly why we tell these stories. Real service isn't always the mission you expected. Sometimes it's the one that finds you. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We'll see you soon. Until then, take care of each other.